Well, again, welcome to everybody, and welcome to everybody that's watching on the YouTube also. I want to say hi to my friend Dee, who's watching from San Antonio, Texas this morning. So it's good to have you all here with us. We're studying lesson 18 today from the Waldron books, and we're starting on question number 4 in the worksheets there. Okay, we're starting with question 4 up here, and we're in the section associated with special times. This particular lesson is called, and we're going to be looking at these special times that the Mosaic Law has within it to help the children of Israel to basically understand God and who this God is that is their God, and to be able to worship Him appropriately. So the question in question 4 here is, how many times a year were all the men of Israel required to appear before the Lord, and the scriptures say, at a place which He chooses, to celebrate these feasts to Him? And you can find the answers there in Exodus 23 and those scriptures that you're looking at right there. And then a follow-up question is, where would that place be once they reached the land of Canaan? And that answer again is in Joshua 18 and verse 1. So how many feasts? How many times were required? Ken says 3. That's exactly right. Okay. And where was this special place going to be once they reached the land of Canaan? Shirley?
3 times a year.
Yes, 3 times a year. And where was the place that the Lord chose once they get into the land of Canaan? Shiloh, exactly, yes. Shiloh was a special place. We've seen all the way back through to Abraham. We've had interactions there at Shiloh. So we're going to see that again. Okay, so question 5. Name the 3 feasts that all of the men of Israel were required to attend, and include all of the alternate names that you could come up with. And then we're going to look at when each of those feasts occurred. So if you were kind of looking from the beginning of the year towards the end of the year, what would be one of those 3 feasts, the first one? The Passover, okay. So specifically, and we're gonna talk about in just a second, it's the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, and it's synonymous with the Passover. Why? Go ahead, Francis. Okay. Okay. And how close was the celebration of the Passover to the Feast of Unleavened Bread?
Immediately following.
Okay, so yes, we're going to find that you're going to have the Passover event, which actually is the thing that begins the Passover then celebration that's known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so you could talk about it in the same way, because it's umbilical cord is tied together through it. So it's the first of the month of the year, and then days 15 through 21 is when that occurs. Okay, so what's the next one that would come up in kind of its order? The one of, okay, first fruits. What are some other names that are also called for it? Feast of Weeks. We'll talk about why that would be called that. What else do I hear over here? Feast of the Harvest. Yeah, and which harvest is this that they're talking about? Okay, the barley harvest. Good, Shirley. Yeah, and the barley is the first grain that comes out of the ground after in all of this, and so that's why it was first. So yeah, you have all these different names for it. In the New Testament, it's begins to be called the Feast of 50 Days. Josephus, the Hebrew historian, uses that a lot. And then it picks up this name, this Greek name or Greek word of Pentecost, and it's associated with the 50 days because a penta is 5 in the Greek language. So that's kind of a New Testament term. So, and the way they get there is you count 7 Sabbaths from the time when they do in the Passover celebration or that first feast. They have this first fruits celebration, which Shirley was talking about, and it's from that you count 7 Sabbaths, and that's 49 days because you have 7 times 7, and then the day after that is the 50th day, and that's when this occurs. And so basically it's a one-day feast. And so when we get to Acts chapter 2 in a couple of years, and we're talking about the New Testament and why the Jews are all gathering together from all over the world, it's because it was a requirement. And it's this Feast of Pentecost. Okay, so what's the third one then? And this one occurs, it's also associated with a harvest, but it's not the first harvest. It's the last harvest. And so what's this feast called? Okay, not the Feast of Weeks. That's the one we just talked about. But the one that follows that. Go ahead, Francis. Okay, the ingathering or the tabernacles. Why? That sounds like it's kind of, those are different things. And if you thought that, you would be right. Because there's different things happening here that are helping people to remember when this thing is and what the purpose of it is. For the Feast of the Ingathering, what's that associated with? As far as that name. It's for this harvest. So we're gathering in the final harvest of the year. And this is when the Jews are going about and doing the things that they're supposed to do, like leaving a portion, leave the corners for the poor and the wayfarer and all those kinds of things. And this is getting that final harvest in. So you would expect that this would be a time of joy or sadness. Yeah, great joy. And so think about the kinds of offerings and kinds of celebration that's going on associated with this. Then you have, it's also called the Feast of Tabernacles. Why would it be called the Feast of Tabernacles? What did that have to do?
Feast of Booths, isn't it?
Oh, and also called the Feast of Booths. Now, those two have something in common. And what's the thing in common that the Feast of Booths and the Feast of Tabernacles, those names, the Tabernacles and the Booths, what do they have in common?
Wilderness.
The wilderness wanderings. Okay. So you mean like 400 years from now, when the children of Israel are gathering at Shiloh? I mean, this is the way it's supposed to happen, right? Gathering at Shiloh, and they're gathering for this Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of Booths. Did they do anything with these booths? What was this? These booths? They said it's part of the wilderness gathering. Did they have to do anything during this festival that would help them? Yeah, they actually put up the booths and lived in them for the time that they're during this festival. And it was to remind them. And again, now we have the tabernacle. Was the tabernacle designed to be a permanent structure that would stay at one place and be there forever? Or was it a movable thing? It was a tent, right? Yeah. Yeah, and so again, we have all of these things are associated with bringing this to remembrance. Now, it happens in the 7th month and the 15th day. We're going to talk a little bit about the Jewish calendar here in just a minute. But this is when And so those are the three major ones. Feast of the Unleavened Bread, first month, day 15 through 21. Feast of the Harvest, which follows after that at the end of those weeks. Okay, so 50 days. It's actually in like the third month of the year is where it falls. And then the Feast of the Ingathering is the seventh month, the last thing associated with it's the last religious kind of thing that goes along with the religious calendar, but there's still 5 more months left in the year, isn't there? And so there's some other things that happen, and the Jews added a few things on their own through traditions and stuff that if you kind of look them up in the Bible, but we don't deal with those because those are man-made things and these are the ones that God required during that period of time. So let's go to question 6. Once Israel reached the land of Canaan, the first month of the Jewish calendar was crowded with 3 significant events. So we talked about for the year, we had 3 festivals where everybody. Now we're going to the first month, and we're going to look at 3 significant events that occur in that month. Okay, so it's a little overlap here, but again, to get the full picture. So what were these 3 events, and when during the month did they occur? And we're looking at Leviticus chapter 23, the first 14 verses there. And then what did each of them celebrate? Okay, so we're covering this again a little bit so that we, again, get a good feel for it. Now, Passover, we've talked about a little bit already, right? Okay, so the second thing then directly attached to the Passover was what?
Unleavened bread, feast of
Feast of the Unleavened Bread. Okay, so we got that. And then what Shirley was talking about, which was this first feast. And Shirley, what was that? That first
weeks.
No. The one before that, having to do with a particular kind of grain, barley. That's right. Barley is the first thing that comes up. It's one of those things that gets planted back here, sits in the ground while everything else is not growing, and then bloop, when the spring comes, boop, up it comes. Here's the barley, first thing. Everything else gets planted in the good weather, and then it comes up later in the year and harvested in the fall. So you got the first fruits of the barley. That comes from a guy from South Philadelphia, okay? I'm not a farmer on this. I know some of you are smiling at me on it. Okay. So there's the first fruits of the barley. Okay, so let's talk about the Passover first of all. All right, so a couple of facts about it. And again, this is a little bit of a reminder because we've seen this already not too long ago. And that is back when they were in Egypt, and you remember when God was going to bring them out of captivity, and this event of Passover becomes the first thing. This is like the 4th of July for the Jews. You know, the beginning of the country. You know, this is the beginning of the nation for them. And on the 10th, so when they're coming out, is the beginning of the year, of the religious year for the Jews. And they call that month Abib in Hebrew. And it's between the middle of March, middle of April for us in our Roman calendars, okay? And again, just at the beginning of the harvest, the first time of the year, it's according to God's creation schedule, all right? So on the 10th day, they selected, they go ahead and select the Passover lamb. You remember back in Egypt, it was, we're getting ready to go tomorrow. And so tonight, I want you to select the lamb, and then and it goes through all these things like here. And nothing changed from when God was giving them these instructions back in Egypt till now. It's the same event that they're commemorating here. So you have the 10th day it's selected because now for they've been out for a while. So that's why, again, you're looking at an event that was the beginning of all things. Now we're in a continuous cycle of it. And so how do you deal with that? Well, first of the year is this month of Abib. The 10th day of that, select the lamb. 14th day at sunset. Why at sunset on the 14th day? What is the significance of sunset for the Jews as far as their day is concerned?
New day.
What's that?
It's a new day.
It's the beginning of the new day. 6 o'clock in the evening is the beginning of the day for the Jews. So here on the 14th day at 5:59, okay, at sunset on the 14th day, you've got the lamb being killed, and then the eating of it and all of that stuff is happening on the 15th day, because the day starts at 6 o'clock in the evening, okay? And so this is why the Passover and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread are linked together, because the Feast of the Unleavened Bread starts on the 15th day, okay, as we go through here. So, and it gets a little confusing at times because of we use a different clock and a different calendar and stuff like that. But you're just try to stick with us, and we'll we'll go over it a number of times. Okay, so what was celebrated with this event, Passover?
Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Okay, going into the Feast of it's specifically the Feast of the Unleavened Bread starting, but there are a few things that God put this in as a specific starting point for a particular reason. And so the Passover to the Jews meant what from a national identity standpoint? Okay, so the deliverance from Egypt. So we're coming out of slavery, and now we're getting into the realization of those promises. Establishing the nation. The numbers of people are already there, but they were slaves, so we got to free them, and then we got to give them a set of laws so they can become a nation, and on and on it goes. So it's the beginning of the Jewish religious calendar, because the Jews had two kinds of calendars. Then it's also, this is the first time that the introduction of the firstborn belonging to God is brought into play, is with the Passover, okay? Because the Passover lamb is being taken, and the firstborn of Egypt is being killed off. And so as a result of that, the firstborn of Israel of everything belongs to the Lord. So this concept of the firstborn now is introduced here. And so then also God, like Jesse said, brought Israel out of captivity with his power, his mercy. And so this is a big deal. This is the beginning of the year and of the religious year for the Jews. Okay, so let's go to the second one then, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which just moves right along with this one. And so we already talked about it, days 15 through 21. Now, so you have on the beginning of the 15th day, you're doing those Passover activities, okay? But something else goes along with those activities associated with the beginning of this Feast of the Unleavened Bread, and that is this idea of the Holy Assembly is brought up in this respect. Seeing a gathering, an assembly of all of Israel together to worship on days 15, so the first day of the feast, and on the last day of the feast, okay? Basically, they're not supposed to eat anything but unleavened bread during that whole period of time, during those 7 days, all right? And so what is being celebrated here? We talked about Israel being brought out of captivity, Who could participate in this feast, this particular one?
This gets into kind of into the types and stuff too. God's establishing a special people here. Who could participate in this? Could a traveler come through?
Well, when they left Egypt, they had to leave in a hurry, so they had only unleavened bread. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
Actually, right now we're talking about who could actually participate, who's allowed by God to participate in this particular feast.
So only the children of Israel, and then those who lived among them, became proselytes, they would have to keep it, but no foreigner.
Only the circumcised could. Okay, so, and
So like Jesse's saying, either a Jew who was a Jew as a result of being a Jew and was circumcised when he was a baby, or afterwards it became, or a proselyte who wanted to be a Jewish worshiper, okay, but they'd have to be circumcised. Circumcision was the sign of whether or not you were a Jew or not. Not just the race, but whether you were practicing the religion or not. So only the only the circumcised could participate. And so as a result of that, you've got a picture of, for the first time, a purification of a separate or a separation of a group from everybody else. Because only the circumcised could participate in this. Okay, so that again is something that is now being placed in the head of the Israelites, that they are a special people. They're God's people. They're supposed to be a holy people. And the idea that for this whole period of time, you remember when they were wandering around in the wilderness? We're going to be doing that. So remember forward into wandering in the wilderness that sustained them during that wandering.
they didn't have any vineyards, right? They didn't stop planting vineyards. Manna, yeah. So think about
The unleavened bread here, the only thing they could eat for these 7 days of this feast, this separate special people that were God's people, the only thing that they could eat during this whole period of time is this unleavened bread. And unleavened bread versus leavened bread, the unleavened bread represented what? Unleavened versus leavened. The unleavened bread represented what? Purity, yeah, exactly. So you have the pure God. God's feeding them with the manna, which they made into flour, into cakes, and all that kind of stuff. There was no leavening associated with any of this to kind of bring out the idea of the purity and all that, and the fact that God is the one sustaining the people here. It wasn't like they were like what they're going to do with eat all the quail you want because God's going to provide a bunch of quail and everything. This is something to get them started about thinking that their whole being is reliant on God for this. And so it would be interesting, 7 days, nothing but unleavened bread. I would get your attention. Okay, so then Shirley's favorite festival, the first fruits of barley, okay? And this happened on the day 16, okay? So one day into the festival, now, and so you had the Holy Assembly on the first day, day 15 of the festival, and then on the very next day, they had this celebration festival, and it's basically to celebrate the first fruits of this new year that are out there. And we talked about this before. We've been talking about the grain offerings, right? And grain offerings were for what?
The grain.
what did the grain offering? You know what burnt offerings were for, right? Remember that.
The expression of devotion.
expression of devotion. Okay, so what would the grain offering be for? They follow the expression of devotion. When you're in a good relationship with your Heavenly Father, the grain offering then would be something to express what?
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving,
Peace.
yeah, grace, thankfulness for God, all the blessings that God. Okay, same kind of thing
we're talking about here. And when you get into the wave offering is like using the grain, okay, as a way of expressing that celebration. But it's also taking and it's sharing that grain, it's sharing it with the person that's bringing it. Sometimes it's sharing it with the priest and the person. Sometimes it's sharing it with the person. It's a communing together with God. You're thanking God, you're offering some of it to God, and you're communing with Him also, and in this joyous occasion. Okay, so you think about that when you're thinking about this particular offering, and as it talks about there, the priest waved, and basically he would, if you're bringing the grain, you got the grain in your hands, and this is what I'm bringing, okay, to offer up. And the priest grabs your hands, and you're kind of doing this together, the wave to God. And then you can, some goes onto the altar, some goes over to the priest, some, and it gets moved around depending on what the offering is for and all that. There's a lot of different ones. Okay, so after the priest waves the offering here with the new grain, then the offerings are, you would expect, because you're in a good relationship with God, you're in a pure relationship with God, so in celebration of that, okay, you're using the burnt offering. And this is back to what April was talking about, right? The burnt offering. Celebrating the fact that you're dedicated, you're committed to God. And so you bring that out. And this is the male, unblemished, 1-year-old. And then the grain, you actually bring out twice the amount. It's more associated with this, the idea of the sharing and the communing. Here, 2/10 of an ephah of the fine flour, and then the drink is always the same amount that goes through. So, now, it says that the people of Israel, once they got to Canaan, and they're waiting for the first grain harvest of the year. You can imagine, all winter has gone by, and they've been living off the stores, and here comes the first grain harvest. Nobody in the entire nation could eat of any kind of bread, grain, anything, until this particular thing was done. Pretty significant event, right? Especially in an agricultural community. Okay, so you can see the importance that God is focusing in on this. Not a single person could eat. They were forbidden to eat bread, parched grain, any fresh ears, anything, until this offering was completed. So it's a big deal for that. Now, we're going to talk about the Jewish calendar for just a second, just to kind of remind you that these things are out there. All right, everybody understands we're today under what is the Roman calendar from back in the days of the Roman Empire. And we've got all our months and everything are based on Roman stuff. August has 31 days because the Emperor Augusta, Caesar Augustus wanted to have his month have more days than the other guys. So, so 31 days. Steal it from another month. Steal it from September. And all of these things. July, that's why July has 31 days. Julius Caesar stole a day, and on it goes. So that's our calendar. These guys, basically a calendar based on the natural order of things. 28-day month, lunar calendar. Okay, we're going to talk about that down at the bottom there. To align the lunar calendar with the solar year, because the solar year is actually closer to the Roman calendar, the 360 days it takes for the Earth to go around the sun, okay? So to align the lunar calendar, which is what the Jews use, is a 28-day calendar, with the solar year, the Jews added an additional month after the final month of Adar every 3 years. So every 3 years, there was another month added at the end of the year called Second Adar, and that caught up all the time. For the Romans, they did every 4 years, we'll add 1 day to a month that we stole a bunch of days from, called February. And that's why we end up with 29 days in February on the leap years, every 4 years. So these guys add a month every 3 years, we add a day every 4 years. So again, this is based, the Jews based their things more closely to the actual natural order of things associated with the moon and all of that. And the Romans, they liked the sun for their things that they did. So, but there's two calendars, a civil calendar and a religious calendar. The one we've been talking about is the religious calendar. It starts in March, April, first month, Abib, and then it finishes up with Adar in February and March time frame. They have a civil calendar, though. You know, think about our calendar. We have a calendar that businesses use, and it's called the fiscal year. And it starts the 1st of October and runs to the end of September, okay? The Jews, as a nation, had the same kind of thing, and they just called it a civil calendar. And their civil calendar started halfway through the year, on the 7th month, and then carried on through to the end. The thing that's interesting is the main feasts for the Jews occurred on the beginning of the religious year, the first month of the religious calendar, and on the 7th month of the religious calendar, but the first month of the civil year for the Jews. So that 1st and 7th month is where all the big stuff occurred. So you can see, how and why they would have put that together like that. God established the religious calendar. And I don't know where the civil calendar ultimately came from as far as the traditions that were associated with that. But it was the business calendar, more or less. Okay? So we talked a little bit about the Feast of the Unleavened Bread and what it celebrated. Okay? And so now on this, let's get a little bit into the booths thing, the Feast of the Harvest. Okay, this is the one that occurs at the 50-day point. And what did it celebrate? Okay, so I wanted to bring this particular scripture in from Deuteronomy, because this probably gives the best summary of a festival that has a lot of different things going on with it. But it's a particularly important festival from the standpoint of our understanding as Christians because of what happens on it. Back in Deuteronomy 16, verses 9 through 12, it says, "You shall count 7 weeks for yourself, and you shall begin to count 7 weeks from the time that you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain." That's that barley, okay? "Then you shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with a voluntary offering." So this is a voluntary thing that's going on here. "Of your hand in a proportional amount, proportional to how you've been prospered, okay, which you shall give just as the Lord your God blesses you. And you shall rejoice before male and female slaves, the Levite, the orphan, place where the Lord your God chooses to establish his name. You shall also remember that you were careful and comply with these. So what's different here from the Feast of Unleavened Bread? What's different between this and the Feast of Unleavened Bread as far as who can participate? It's voluntary. That's correct. It is voluntary. But who can participate in this versus the Feast of Unleavened Bread? Yeah, anybody can participate in this one. Anybody that happens to be there. So this is a joyous occasion. You have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is this very solemn occasion of the birth of this nation and the death of all the blood and the firstborn and all of that is going on. This is the celebration of the first harvest, and thank you, God, for all of that. We're into a new year and we're ready to go, and just, and so there's a whole different feeling for this one versus the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. But it's basically, it's still, everything all goes back. Remember, you were a slave in Egypt, and I brought you out. And it's a voluntary offering, and so that makes a big difference. So, okay, question 8. What 3 significant events in the Jewish calendar occurred in the 7th month then? The 7th month. Okay, what would be the first thing that occurred in
The Feast of the Trumpets. Okay, so you got this feast called
in Hebrew, Rosh Hashanah, and that they still do that one today. And then there was a second very, very solemn occasion that occurred. What was that?
in the 7th month.
Day of Atonement.
Day of Atonement, okay. Also known as Yom Kippur.
All right, and then the one we've been talking about here is the Feast of the Ingathering, the Tabernacles, the Feast of the Booths, etc. So let's talk about what each one celebrated. The Feast of the Trumpets, since this is the beginning of the 7th month, this one's actually like a New Year's for everybody, because this is the beginning of the civil year. So it's their new year for the civil year within the nation of Israel. So this is their New Year's Day, and that's the way they celebrate it today. And you had Holy Assembly, where no rigorous work was done. The idea was to present Israel before the Lord for his favor, as far as the celebration associated with this. And then later on, this tradition of the civil year and the new year associated with business and everything was brought in with that. Okay, then there's the Day of Atonement. Now, what was the big deal about the Day of Atonement?
It's the one day the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies.
Okay, one day a year, the priest could go into
The Holy of Holies.
the Holy of Holies and do what?
Offer blood. Sprinkle blood. For the sins.
Sprinkle blood for what?
For the sins.
For his sins.
For his sins.
His sins first. He has to even get in. He's got to do the thing for his sin. We talked about this one already. And then he offers and makes atonement for the sins of the whole nation for this. So that's a big deal. Once a year they did this. And this is what we talk about, taking the sins and passing them forward
To the next year. What was the thing that was constantly before the nation of Israel? They would see every day. Sacrifices, blood, killing, all of this was happening all the time was before them. And so, again, it's something that God put right in front of them so that their sins would be at the front of their mind. And so that's, again, from a an antitype standpoint, we've got some things that are interesting to look at there. And this would cleanse the priests and the people and purify them. Okay, so then you had the Feast of the Ingathering and the Tabernacles. And so basically this was the end of the agricultural cycle for these guys. And again, the harvest is in. So why do we have Thanksgiving in the fall in the United States? I mean, the Pilgrims did it sort of during that period of time, you know, in the fall. But what happens in the fall? Harvest. And everybody's happy. If you have a good harvest, everybody's happy. If you don't have a good harvest, everybody's going to starve. And so, yeah, it comes there. So it's to remember. It's that, and they lived in the booths, in the tents, during their wandering in the wilderness, and so they did the same thing here to remind them. Okay, so question 9. When was the Sabbath year, and what were the Israelites commanded by God to do during this time? A Sabbath year. The name itself would tell you something about this. When was the Sabbath?
The 7th year?
7th year, right.
Just like the Sabbath day is the 7th day, it's the 7th year. And what would they do with the crops on the 7th year? Now we're getting into farmer stuff.
Let them rest.
Yeah, let them rest. Yeah, late.
Fallow for all the ground and all of that, the vineyards, the olive trees, everything. Anyone could have whatever they want, whatever the ground produced without you touching it. You could go ahead and use that, but you couldn't reap anything for future use, for seed gathering and stuff like that. Okay? And now this was interesting. On the seventh year, the Hebrew slaves, there were all kinds of rules that were put forth here for the kind treatment of the slaves during this period of time, and setting them free, keeping them if they decide they want to stay with their master. There's all rules on that. And the other part was the debt forgiveness to fellow Hebrews. Every 7th year, all the debts went away for if you owed money to a fellow Hebrew. And then this is a big one here. And you think back to Nehemiah and Ezra and the reading of the law. Well, here, every seventh year, they were required in assembly to read the law. Now, can you imagine? Only once. But again, it was more than they were doing it before. Once every 7 years it required. Okay, last question on this one. When was the year of Jubilee? And what were the Israelites? Okay, so the 50th. So 7 times 7 years, basically. And it was on the Day of Atonement on that 50th year. And so here you have similar to the Sabbath. It's a year where you're releasing from work and debt. Nothing's planted or reaped. Everyone returns to their own property. This one right here, everyone returning to their own property, is a big deal because of the way God set up where the tribes were to live and everything. If you were intermarrying between tribes or had to sell your land to another person from another tribe and everything, then all those tribal boundaries would get all messed up. But every 7 years, you reset the clock, basically, and all the land went back to its original places. So, and then they had things for the poor and stuff like that. So, okay, so next week, we're going to be starting with vows. Vows, and that's an interesting one. So look forward to that. Go ahead, Ken.
Abundance of crops in the 6th year to cover the 7th and 8th year, because you would plant your crops in the 8th year, which would not come until the 9th year. So you need sustenance for both the 7th and 8th years.
Yeah, you have that, and you have the idea of, I got a bunch of stuff in my garden that popped up last year that I planted the year before, and
it didn't come up very well. And here, the following year, all of a sudden, I'm getting tomatoes and popping up and out. And I almost got more in the year that I didn't plant it than I did in the first. Now it's gone this year, but things like that. There was excess, and God would provide, basically.